In this video, we're going to talk about another element of composition, and that is a technique called layering. So the purpose of layering in an image is to bring interest and to bring depth to a photo. And you can do this often with the environment around you, just like we've talked about with framing and some of the other techniques in composition. So today I'm going to walk you through some examples of layering so that you can get an idea of what this looks like both in the natural world, but also maybe if you are doing a lifestyle session or an indoor session. So I've just gathered a handful of my own images that utilize this technique, and I'm going to walk you through them. So the first thing that I want you to keep in mind when you are thinking about layering, the easiest way to think about it is to remember that in every scene there is a foreground, there's a middle, and there's a background. And so when we're using layering, really it's just the concept of using those three different parts in whatever way you find works to add depth and dimension to your image. So that can be utilizing the foreground, it can be utilizing the background a certain way, whatever that might be for the story that you're wanting to tell. So in portrait photography, for my style, I typically use layering by doing creative things with the foreground of my photo. And so that's what you'll see here in these examples. Sometimes with landscape photography and even with portrait photography, there are other ways to do this as well. But you'll see in my examples that I'm utilizing the foreground in these photos to utilize layering as a technique for my composition. So you'll also notice that just like we've talked about in our other videos, there are other techniques of composition at play here as well. So here we're talking about layering, but you'll also notice that this image is also utilizing the rule of thirds. So my subject is over here in the upper left third of the photo, but you'll see that in the foreground, I have kind of taken the shot partially behind some of the vines here. This is a shot at the vineyard. I've used one of her other photos for some of my other videos here. And in this photo, I created depth and added to the foreground by utilizing some of those leaves to kind of block out a portion as if we're like peeking around the edge of the greenery and looking at her. So it just adds an element of depth and dimension. So here we have the foreground, we have the middle where the subject is, and then we've got the background. And this background is giving us context to what this is. Otherwise, this might look a little weird, right? But because we can see the background, we know that what this is here, that is just more leaves, and it just is giving that depth to the image. In this photo here, we've done the same thing. This one is a little bit less dramatic, but here we have these flowers that were kind of hanging off of this tree. They are in the foreground, they're more blurred out. My subject is a little bit further back, and so they are in focus, and then you've got the background back here. But I have created the layers by utilizing those pretty flowers in the foreground, and that just adds a really neat pop of color to the photo, but it also kind of helps the little girl's pink shoes pop because we're kind of pulling out of those same colors. In this photo, we've just utilized some hedges that were present in the environment. I kind of took my angle down, shot from a lower angle, and just placed those in the foreground. Again, just adding a little bit of variety to an image, making something stand out just a little bit differently by creating that depth. And again, so this is how I'm creating layering here, by placing something in the foreground that is out of focus while I'm still placing the focus on my subject. This is a really subtle use of layering. I like to do this sometimes simply because if I have really dynamic light like this, because it doesn't always have to be like a full like plant in front of someone like this or an entire hedge. In this photo, there was literally like one small, I don't remember if it was a branch or it might have been like a leaf, but it was something very thin and delicate that I just brought into the frame a tiny bit. And so it's not this super dramatic thing, but because of its size and its color and the way it was grabbing the light, it just creates this really neat dimension over here. Your eye still goes right to the subjects, but you just have this visual depth that's added to the photo. So it doesn't always have to be dramatic. It can be very, very small. This is just another small use of layering. Here I've got the family kind of up against this these plants here, and just a small amount of them right here in front. Again, we're just adding a little bit of depth. We have a foreground, we have the middle, and we have a background. Same here. This time the flowers are just right off to the right. And then you'll see the same family here. We're also utilizing layering here. We've got these flowers in the foreground, this really neat plant, kind of adding some texture. So we have a foreground in the middle where the subjects are, and the background for some context. And then one last example outdoors. Here, it was really fun to utilize these beautiful fall colors in this photo. This would have been a really beautiful photo just kind of all by itself, just like this without this. But by adding in these colors, you add that punch of fall color, but you also add that depth. So it's just another way to get variety in the photos there. So I pulled in a couple of examples from how you can do this indoor. So this was in my photography studio, and I had this curtain kind of hanging over. It was actually placed like on the doorway to the studio, and I just pulled that right over and just let that create a little bit of dimension to the photo, kind of give you that feeling that you're peeking in, but you still have the beautiful light coming through. There's a little bit of opacity there so you can see through, but it just gives you that layer. Like here we are, we're peeking in on this special moment with the family. And then this is a really old photo from like my very early days. This is my son playing in his room, and he was supposed to be napping, I think, and he was playing with his helicopter, but it was really too cute to not capture. But in this case, I'm utilizing the door frame and the wall in my layering to again give you that dimension and to create the scene like I was seeing it. I went up to check on him, and I'm literally peeking in, and I see him in there playing. And that's what I wanted to create, was what it felt like for me when I came to the top of the stairs and I was standing in the landing, and how I looked through. And so by creating these layers, I'm able to recreate that visual experience for the viewer of my image. So really with layering, you look all around you, and what do you have to create a foreground, a background, and how do you do that in your image in a way that tells a story and that adds depth and dimension in a meaningful way. We don't always have to use this technique, but when we use it and when we use it well, it's always very powerful.